Hi, it's me Eleanor. Or Al as some people who barely know me call me because it sounds, I don't know, more approachable? I'm a photographer. Well, I was a photographer. Now I'm more of a professional cloud gazer maybe? I hit a wall. A creative wall so thick, so impenetrable, that it felt less like a wall and more like a new, unwanted room in my life. Seattle gray had seeped into my soul and my photos, they just looked like expensive snapshots of sad rain. So what does one do when one's soul is wallpapered in gloom? One buys a one-way ticket to, well, anywhere that isn't Seattle. I chose Reykjavik. Because, let's be honest, it sounds like a place you go to find yourself after you lose yourself in a sea of lattes and artisanal dog sweaters. Reykjavik smells like sulfur and hope. I checked into a tiny guest house run by a woman named Helga who spoke to me mostly in interpretive gestures involving puffins. My room had a view of a parking lot and, beyond that, a sliver of the North Atlantic. Inspiring? Not exactly. But different. I wandered the streets, my camera clutched like a shield. I saw the Hallgrímskirkja church, all imposing and concrete, like a brutalist spaceship. I saw colorful houses huddled together against the wind, looking like a child's building blocks scattered by a grumpy giant. But I didn't see anything worth photographing. Not yet. Then at a cafe called Babalu, I saw him. He was sitting in a corner, surrounded by stacks of books. He had this unruly mop of hair that looked like it had been styled by a hurricane. He was wearing a sweater that could generously be described as vintage, and he was reading a book with a cover that just said, potatoes. I know, right? Potatoes. Who reads a book about potatoes? He looked up, caught me staring, and smiled. It was the kind of smile that rearranged my internal organs. Not in a painful way, just in a, oh, maybe I'm not dead inside after all kind of way.
Is there something fascinating about my potatoes?
I stammered something about admiring his commitment to root vegetables. Smooth.
They are more profound than you might think. The humble potato has fed civilizations, fueled revolutions, and made excellent vodka.
He winked. It was an objectively dorky wink, but somehow endearing. We talked. About potatoes, about Iceland, about the existential dread of being a creative person in a world obsessed with cat videos. His name was Liam and he was, well, he didn't really say what he was. He was exploring. He was between things. He was, in short, perfectly mysterious. We spent the next few days wandering Reykjavik together. He showed me hidden courtyards, told me stories about Icelandic folklore, and even took me to a thermal pool where we floated in lukewarm water under the northern lights, which I should add finally inspired me to take a decent photograph. Liam had this way of seeing the world that was different. He found beauty in the mundane, poetry in the ordinary. He'd stop to examine a moss-covered rock, or listen intently to the sound of the wind through the volcanic rocks. He saw things I had stopped seeing.
Look at the way the light catches the steam. It's like the earth is breathing.
And he was right. It was. I felt like I was seeing the world through his eyes and everything was brighter somehow. Of course, there was the elephant in the room. The giant, potato-shaped elephant. I didn't know anything about him. Where was he from? What did he do? Why was he so obsessed with root vegetables? One evening, after a few too many Brennivin shots, Icelandic schnapps that tastes vaguely of licorice and regret, I asked him. I braced myself for some kind of wild, globe-trotting adventurer story. A secret agent. A lost prince. Something equally ridiculous.
I work for a company that analyzes soil composition.
Soil composition? Really? My inner romantic was deeply disappointed. He saw my face fall.
I know it doesn't sound very glamorous, but it's important work. We help farmers optimize their crops, prevent soil erosion, and yes, sometimes we study potatoes.
He looked genuinely passionate about it. And weirdly, that made him even more attractive. This wasn't some brooding artist hiding a dark secret. This was a guy who cared about dirt. Literally. I started taking photos again. Not of grand landscapes or tourist attractions, but of the small things. The way Liam's hair fell across his forehead when he was concentrating, the texture of the moss on the rocks, the steam rising from his coffee cup. He was my muse. My accidental, potato-loving muse. We traveled to the Snæfellsnes Peninsula, a place that looks like the end of the world. Black sand beaches, towering cliffs, and a glacier that looks like it was sculpted by a particularly temperamental god. One day, we were hiking along a coastal path when we came across a field of wildflowers. It was the kind of scene that makes you want to weep with joy.
It's like a painting, isn't it?
I raced my camera, framing the shot. The light was perfect. The colors were vibrant. And in that moment, I knew. I was falling in love with him. It was terrifying. I hadn't felt anything like this in years. I had convinced myself that I was immune to love, that I was destined to wander the earth alone, taking blurry photos of my own loneliness. But here I was, standing in a field of wildflowers in Iceland, completely and utterly smitten with a soil analyst who had a strange fondness for potatoes. Of course, nothing good ever lasts, does it? A few days later, Liam told me he had to leave. His exploring was coming to an end. He had to go back to, well, he didn't say where he was going back to. Just back. My heart sank faster than a lead weight in the North Atlantic.
I should have told you sooner. I didn't want to spoil things.
Spoil things. He had turned my life upside down, made me believe in magic again, and then was just going to vanish back into the soil analyzing ether? I tried to be cool. I tried to be understanding. But all I could manage was a pathetic, watery smile. We spent his last night together in a tiny cabin overlooking the black sand beach. The wind howled outside, rattling the windows. We didn't talk much. Just sat in silence, watching the waves crash against the shore. In the morning, he was gone. I watched his plane take off, a tiny speck disappearing into the gray sky. I felt like I had been punched in the gut. I spent the next few days wandering Reykjavik in a daze. I tried to take photos, but everything looked dull again. The colors were muted, the light was flat. Seattle gray had returned with a vengeance. I almost booked a flight back home. But something stopped me. Something Liam had said.
The world is full of wonders, Eleanor. You just have to look for them.
So I didn't go home. Instead, I decided to follow Liam. Not literally, of course. I didn't know where he was going, but I decided to follow his lead. To look for the beauty in the mundane, to find the poetry in the ordinary. I bought a map of Iceland and started exploring. I visited remote fishing villages, hiked through lava fields, and soaked in more thermal pools than I care to admit. And slowly, gradually, I started to see things again. I saw the resilience of the Icelandic people, their ability to thrive in a harsh and unforgiving landscape. I saw the beauty of the volcanic rocks, their jagged edges softened by moss and lichen. I saw the magic of the northern lights, dancing across the sky in a symphony of color. I started taking photos again. Not because I felt like I had to, but because I wanted to. Because I saw the world differently now. And then one day I got a postcard. It was postmarked from Seattle. The picture on the front was of a potato. Of course. The message was short and sweet. The soil here is surprisingly rich. Come home, Liam. I laughed. I cried. I booked a flight. Seattle still smelled like coffee and rain, but it felt different. Brighter somehow. I went to the address on the postcard. It was a small community garden in the heart of the city. And there he was, kneeling in the dirt planting potatoes. He looked up when he saw me. His face lit up.
Eleanor, you came.
I ran to him and hugged him. I didn't care about soil composition or root vegetables. I just cared about him. He pulled back, looked at me with those eyes that rearranged my internal organs.
I know it's not Iceland, but maybe we can find some magic here too.
He gestured to the garden.
We're starting a project to teach people how to grow their own food, to reconnect with the earth, to find beauty in the, well, you know.
I smiled. I knew. I picked up a trowel and knelt beside him. Turns out you don't need to travel to the ends of the earth to find yourself. Sometimes all you need is a little dirt, a few potatoes, and someone to share the view. Even if that view is just a rainy day in Seattle. And that's my story. Or at least the beginning of it. I'm still a photographer. But now I'm also a gardener. And a girlfriend. And maybe, just maybe, I'm finally starting to understand what it means to be truly happy. So, there I was back in Seattle digging in the dirt with Liam. It felt like a dream, a surreal rom-com scene unfolding in my very real, very messy life. But dreams have a way of revealing their less-than-perfect seams, don't they? The community garden was, well, let's just say it wasn't exactly Eden. More like a scrappy patch of urban green, squeezed between a parking lot and a laundromat. But it was our scrappy patch. Liam was in his element. He knew the names of all the plants, the pH levels of the soil, the secret language of worms. He was a dirt whisperer. I, on the other hand, was mostly just good at making muddy handprints on my jeans. But I was learning. Learning about compost, about heirloom tomatoes, about the satisfaction of watching something grow from a tiny seed. And I was learning about Liam.
Did I ever tell you about the Great Potato Blight of the 1840s?
Oh God, please no.
Fascinating. It wiped out entire crops in Ireland, leading to mass starvation and emigration.
He could turn anything into a history lesson. But there was something captivating about his passion. And beneath the layers of soil science and potato trivia, I was starting to see a different side of him. A vulnerability. A hint of sadness that he kept hidden beneath his quirky exterior. I was starting to photograph him again. Not just candid shots of him in the garden, but portraits. I wanted to capture that hidden sadness, that quiet strength. One evening as I was editing the photos, I noticed something. A small scar on his wrist. It was barely visible, but it was there. And it looked deliberate. My heart lurched. I had been so caught up in the romance, in the rediscovery of my own creativity, that I hadn't really stopped to consider that Liam might have his own secrets, his own demons. I knew I had to ask him about it, but I was terrified. What if he clammed up? What if he disappeared again? What if the potato-loving prince turned out to be something else entirely? We were sitting in a coffee shop, the kind with mismatched chairs and a chalkboard menu that no one ever reads. I took a deep breath. I asked him. He didn't say anything for a long time. He just stared into his coffee, his face pale.
That's a long story.
I waited. He finally looked up at me. His eyes were filled with a kind of pain I had never seen before.
I used to struggle with depression. Badly. A few years ago, things got really dark. I tried to end my life.
My stomach dropped. I reached across the table and took his hand. He didn't flinch.
I'm okay now. I'm better. But it's something I still deal with. Something I'll probably always deal with.
He told me about his struggles, about the therapists, the medications, the dark thoughts that still sometimes crept into his mind. He told me about his family, who he had distanced himself from, feeling like a burden. He told me about why he had gone to Iceland. To escape, to heal, to find some kind of purpose again. It was a lot to take in. My romantic fantasy shattered into a million pieces. But in its place, something more real, more profound began to emerge. I saw him, truly saw him for the first time. Not as some quirky, potato-obsessed muse, but as a human being, struggling to find his way in a world that often felt overwhelming. That night, we lay in bed holding each other. He cried. I cried. We talked for hours until the sun started to rise. He revealed a secret, not to me in the way I expected, but on my old camera. He asked me to develop it, and I can see his pain clearly. We finally understand each other completely. I think about his scar, the one that brought a pain to my chest. It's gone. After that, things changed. Not in a dramatic overnight way, but in a subtle, meaningful way. We became a team. We supported each other. We learned to navigate the ups and downs of life together. He started going to therapy again. He reconnected with his family. He started writing poetry. And I learned to be more honest, more vulnerable, more open to the imperfections of life. But there was another twist waiting for us, wasn't there? One day, a woman showed up at the garden. She was elegant, well-dressed, and looked completely out of place amidst the muddy flower beds. She introduced herself as Dr. Anya Sharma. And she was Liam's fiancé. Yes, you heard that right. Fiancé. As in, the person he was supposed to marry. I felt like I had been punched in the stomach. Anya was gracious. Painfully so. She explained that she and Liam had been together for 5 years. That they had planned a wedding. That he had suddenly disappeared a few months ago, leaving her heartbroken and confused.
I just wanted to see him. To understand.
Liam looked like he wanted to crawl into a hole and die. He tried to explain, to apologize, to make sense of the mess he had created. But there was no explanation. No apology that could undo the damage. We fought. We screamed. We cried. I accused him of being a liar, a manipulator, a heartbreaker. He accused himself of being a coward, a fool, a deeply flawed human being.
I don't know what's wrong with me. I felt suffocated. I needed to escape. I didn't mean to hurt anyone.
Didn't mean to hurt anyone? He had destroyed 2 lives. Mine and Anya's. I told him to leave. I told him I never wanted to see him again. He left. And I was alone. But this time it was different. This time I wasn't just sad. I was angry. Betrayed. Completely and utterly broken. I spent the next few weeks in a haze of grief and self-pity. I stopped taking photos. I stopped going to the garden. I stopped eating. I was spiraling. One day I found myself drawn back to the garden. It was overgrown, neglected. The plants were wilting. It looked as broken and abandoned as I felt. I started weeding. Just to do something, anything to distract myself from the pain. As I was pulling weeds, I found something buried in the dirt. A small wooden box. I opened it. Inside there was a letter. It was from Liam, addressed to Anya. In the letter he poured out his heart. He explained his depression, his fears, his reasons for leaving. He apologized for the pain he had caused. He confessed his love for her. But then he said something that stopped me in my tracks. I am no longer the person you once knew. I am very regretful, but this is no longer my world. I'll pray and will always love you. I reread the letter. Over and over again. And then it hit me. Liam hadn't just run away from Anya. He had run away from himself. He had been trying to escape the darkness that haunted him. He had been searching for a new identity, a new purpose. And he had found it. In the garden. In the soil. In the connection to the earth. And in me. I tracked down Anya. I showed her the letter. At first she was angry, hurt, skeptical. But as she read the letter, her expression softened. She saw the truth in his words. She saw the depth of his pain.
He was lost.
We talked for hours. We shared our stories. We bonded over our love for a man who had caused us both so much pain. And then something unexpected happened. We became friends. Anya was amazing. Brilliant, compassionate, and surprisingly funny. She was a doctor, a researcher, a healer. She was everything I wasn't. And yet we connected. On a deep soul level. We started working together at the garden. Anya used her medical knowledge to help people with their health problems. I used my photography to document our progress. And slowly the garden started to heal. And so did we. One day Liam came back. He looked different. Calmer, more grounded. He had been to therapy. He had apologized to his family. He had started to forgive himself. He came to the garden. He saw Anya. He saw me. He saw the community we had built. He didn't say anything. He just started digging in the dirt. It wasn't a fairy tale ending. It wasn't a perfect resolution. It was messy, complicated, and imperfect. But it was real. Liam, Anya, and I, we formed a strange, unconventional family. We supported each other. We challenged each other. We loved each other. And we learned that sometimes, the greatest love stories are the ones that break all the rules. I'm still a photographer. I still love taking pictures of the small, beautiful moments in life. But now I also take pictures of the garden. Of the people who work there. Of the potatoes that grow there. And sometimes I even take pictures of Liam. He's still a little broken, a little flawed. But so am I. So are we all. And that's okay. Because in the end, it's not about finding the perfect love story. It's about finding the courage to love, even when things are messy, even when things are hard, even when things seem impossible. It's about finding the beauty in the imperfection. It's about finding the potatoes in the dirt. Thanks for listening. And remember, even when life throws you a curveball, even when your heart is broken into a million pieces, there's always hope. There's always a new beginning. And there's always a potato-shaped adventure waiting to be discovered. Wow, that was a roller coaster, right? I know it's a long one, but I feel it's important to share it with you all. I'd love to hear your thoughts and experiences in the comments below. Have you ever taken a leap of faith that changed your life? Have you ever found love in the most unexpected place? What's your favorite root vegetable? Just kidding, mostly. Don't forget to like this video, subscribe for more stories like this, and share it with anyone who needs a little bit of hope and inspiration today. Also, let me know what your favorite story is. That's what I'm going to post more.